What were some of the biggest challenges you had and you overcame in your time working in the administration?
Well, a couple of things. The first was a transition from regional newspaper to a national newspaper. It was a bigger stage. So when I went from the St. Petersburg Times to the Wall Street Journal, that was an adjustment. And then I had a further adjustment when I went from print, working for a newspaper, into television, because it calls on a different set of skills. And so that was less familiar. You know, the reporting part was familiar, but the on-camera part wasn't. And so I think that was the biggest challenge.
And so what lesson did you learn from your time covering the Obama administration that you would give or might be useful for other journalists and other future wanting to be White House correspondents?
Well, I think the lesson that I drew from covering Obama is to apply your critical thinking skills to evaluating political controversies. There was a lot of stuff that swirled in the air politically during the Obama administration that wasn't well founded in reality or the truth, and it can be difficult to separate those things out from legitimate political debate. And so I think people need to be very careful in reporting on political conflict, in seeing as best they can to understand what are arguments that have merit and what are arguments that don't have merit, and assess them appropriately depending on where they fall on that spectrum.
So it's interesting you should talk about merit, because we're living in a day and age where misinformation is an epidemic. We have a big problem with that going along right now. How does somebody try and navigate and try and control what can have merit, what cannot? How do we determine what's real and what's fake?
Well, that's hard, and some of it comes with experience from having seen multiple controversies over decades. But the misinformation challenge is very real, and the more deeply divided the country is, the more difficult that is, because people get locked into particular points of view. The best way for journalists to prepare is to get the best education that you can, and try to understand the discipline that you're covering and those more broadly beyond it, so that you can bring your own knowledge base and you're not dependent on statements by political actors to evaluate whether what they're saying is correct or not. That you have some independent judgment. That's what journalists can add to the discussion that press releases from political figures can't do. Is you can say, here's what they're talking about, and here's the reality of the situation. It's not always as easy as saying this is real and this isn't, but when misinformation is so prevalent, you can certainly evaluate things that are untrue that you can determine to be untrue, and if you say that plainly, that's a step forward.
How did the social media take part in the media's idea of all this whole thing, and how did it change the course of the administration, and did it change your reporting? Because social media started to really get big in those later years of the Obama administration.
I don't think it changed my reporting all that much, although it was a challenge of covering a campaign. You know, there's certain ways in which became familiar to campaign coverage, people like me who cover elections, and you evaluate the effectiveness on a campaign based on poll numbers or based on, you know, what their television ads were and that sort of thing. But the Obama administration figured out earlier and better than most about ways to contact voters that weren't the traditional ways, and social media was a big part of that. Now, social media also had a role to play in setting brush fires of controversy on certain issues, and so it kicks up a lot of reaction. But most of the Obama administration, from my standpoint, covering social media was covering their use of social media and trying to figure out how effective that was, because it wasn't obviously apparent. You know, how many people are they reaching on smartphones? That was a big part of their strategy, say, when Obama was reelected in 2012, and it was something that wasn't so visible as a television ad is to a campaign reporter, and so you had to try to get on top of that in other ways.